So here we are, it's May Day, it's International Workers' Day, and joining us is the Jawaharlal Nehru University Student Union President, Oishi Ghosh. It's a real pleasure to have Oishi join us to talk about, well, we'll see what we talk about, that's to be determined. A student at JNU, a student leader, not just at JNU any longer, but a student leader of the student movement in India, which has been struggling for at least the past decade against a serious attack at studying, what it just means to study. She was very badly beaten up on the 5th of January 2020, survived that, was not intimidated, came back publicly, her head bandaged, her arm in a sling, an iconic image. Oishi, thanks so much for joining us at live.leftword.com.
Thank you so much for having me here, because it's just a great pleasure to share our views on this iconic day and every day to carry on forward our struggles.
Well, you're in Durgapur today in West
Yeah.
Bengal. This is your hometown, right?
Yes.
You, like so many students, had to leave your dormitories and so on and go home if possible. Some people couldn't, but that was your situation.
Yes.
How did you spend yesterday, Oishi? Yesterday you did something quite special. Could you talk a little bit about what you did yesterday?
So, from the past couple of days, as we know, the organization I belong to, the Students Federation of India, has been voluntarily helping establish, form community kitchens around in different places wherever through we are able to do it. And in my city, comrades here from SFI are trying to reach out to people who really need medical goods or any kind of food during these tough times. So yesterday, comrades from SFI and all of us decided to volunteer in one of those places where women were not able to access medical health, like medical goods, and so we decided to give them sanitary napkins, medicines, essential medicines, and soaps and sanitizers, so that, as we know already in the society, the marginalized sections are already vulnerable, and out of that we know that women, how much women will be vulnerable during these times of lockdown. They wouldn't be able to access, and there have been reports already coming up that so many women are losing their lives due to either domestic violence or not getting access to healthcare facilities during already this time of corona. So we tried our best to reach out to these women out in these areas where they are not getting sufficient and basic minimum healthcare facilities.
Talk a little bit about this, Oishi, because in much of the coverage about Corona and the lockdown and so on, less, I think, discussion has taken place on the special impact this has had on women's lives, particularly on the lives of working class women. Talk a little bit more about that, because I think it's very little talked about.
Yeah, I think so. As rightly you have pointed out, that the issue that what COVID is impacting on especially the marginalized section, and that too on women, is something that is not talked about in the general mainstream media or any kind of general talks, because people are thinking that corona as a virus is spreading and we should just force a lockdown, and lockdown would just completely stop the virus, and also just is a solution to all the problems. But when we go deeper into the ground reality is something very different. It is not what the actual media is trying to cover. So women have a lot of issues, and especially if you are a working woman, you are having to go out to job to make sure that your family sustains from your basic livelihood. So as the reports are saying, that this lockdown has impacted hugely on the working class people and women who maybe don't have any support in their family or are the bread earners of their family. Many of the household people I know around my society, a lot of working women who used to work in different house, generally during normal times, they have been kept out of work, and they are not being even paid their wages. But suddenly, people have said them that from tomorrow don't come for work. From tomorrow don't come to clean our utensils or work in our home, because we think that this is contagious, the diseases, and it might spread from anywhere. So we'll just see what to do. So in one way, the lockdown is for the whom, it's for the ones who can have that privilege to sustain the lockdown. But that news of that you don't come to work from tomorrow has exploited so many workers down in the ground we can't even imagine of. And now they don't know where to go, from where do they get immediate financial help. They can't rise against the people who used to hire them maybe before or something. They don't know what to do. They don't have healthcare facilities. There is no hospital facility for them in case even if they're falling sick due to COVID. They don't know. And moreover, the problem has happened that in all these families there are children, which is also not talked about, how it has badly impacted the children, the younger generation in our country. Now the parents who are worrying about feeding their child, usually they used to send their children to school to get fed some midday meal or something like this. All the system that was still there, I'm not saying that it was perfect, but whatever little was there, now they don't have anything. Now if we go deeply, we see that lockdown was something that was a government decision which came from top down. Nobody wanted lockdown, but it was told to us that lockdown is the preferable solution at this moment to stop coronavirus from spreading and having a community transmission. So now there wasn't any fault of this working class that they themselves told that we voluntarily want to do this. If they would have been on the streets now, they would have been earning. But when government took an decision like this, top down decision, it was the responsibility of the government to ensure that food at least reaches to every home and they don't have to come down to the streets or make their bodies more vulnerable in a way to ensure the lockdown sustains. And this whole onus, the pictures coming from Delhi UP border have shook the not only this country, the nation, but around the world, that what is actually what it is facing. It made the uglier picture of this lockdown come out in front every one of us, which we were understanding maybe in small bits or parts. The boys in Bihar eating frogs, the Jahangirpur school video where people are almost dying out of stampede when they hear sudden news come out that midday meals are suddenly being distributed in a government school in Delhi. All these videos reflect that what actually the 70% of the people in our country today is facing. Lockdown, I'll tell you from one example I would really like to say from my city. Many people are calling for help and telling purposefully that don't tell anyone, because this is the first time in their life they're asking for help, and they feel that they're feeling ashamed or shameful that they're having to ask for food or ask for basic materials or general supplies from organizations or NGOs which are helping. So we can understand what is the present scenario, and out of all this, the brunt obviously comes on the women, because the women has to not only see the livelihood, in some cases they are also having to handle the household chores. Especially the number of SOS calls that we are getting of domestic violence is alarming. In 1 week, 92,000 SOS calls is something not like usual and can't be usual. So we don't know in the 21 days of lockdown how much more the women had to face, because yesterday news came in different places that more than 1,000 women have lost their life, and brutal images, women's faces have come, how they have sustained domestic violence and impact of that during this whole lockdown. So it's a brutal picture in front of us, and what I am apprehending that a lot of women might lose their lives due to not getting food, or whatever food they might be getting at this moment they are able to get, they might be making sure that their children have it, and they would just starve themselves to death at a point of time.
I mean, this is a very, very important feature of what's been happening globally. Globally, one has seen rise of violence against women, lack of livelihood, lack of access to healthcare for women. Very important things that just don't get talked about. But I think the point you made is so key, that this was a decision, this lockdown, that came from above. If you compare India's decisions to Vietnam, it's night and day. Vietnam used such a scientific approach. The Indian decision, just like demonetization, came out of nowhere. This is Modi's stock in trade, announced something, suddenly. But what I wanted to ask you about, just to shift, although it's related, is, this sudden decision takes place without planning. You're a student leader. There are lots of college and university students far from home who must have also been stranded by this decision. Could you talk a little bit about the impact of students on the decision of the lockdown, where there was no planning on their behalf?
Uh, Rightly, as you pointed out, that I feel that students have been impacted a lot. The student community has been impacted a lot. It might not come just like a shock to people now, but it will be gradually understood. If the government wants to take it as a serious risk, it's a high time that we should be acting upon. Because I was just going through the reports, what happened in 2014 when Ebola broke out in Africa and what was the impact. I was just trying to go through, and that is what made me write an article in Student Struggle. I tried to just put on my views, what I feel that the student community is going through. Uh, Even in the Ebola, United Nations said that it was a very big mistake for those countries to not take the student community and the children as an important factor, and that led to lose a lot of younger generations in Africa towards this towards that pandemic that time, and they lost a whole lot of generation from schools and everything dismantled and got destroyed. The progressive years of education, everything got destroyed. Now, in a country like India, in 70 years, I'm not saying that nothing has happened. Yeah, we have able to reach where we have been able to bring certain amount of women into education sector. We have been able to bring the marginalized into education sector. A lot of first generation learners trying to cope up with this education sector and everything. We know that. But a sudden decision of lockdown, suddenly somebody comes and says you that your schools, colleges close. You don't know where to go. You don't know what is the next help that you're going to give. And the government officials go, mom, it is left on to you to decide whether you want to go back to your hometown, you want to stay. If you had money, you could go back, you could purchase a flight ticket. Those who didn't have money, they somehow just jumped into the bogie of train with other thousands of passengers, maintaining no physical distancing, because they couldn't afford to maintain a physical distance in a train where there is already 1,000 people in the compartment. They made their bodies more vulnerable to this virus when there was already risk. WHO was continuously saying from the mid of March that there are risk of community transition. So students were left clueless. Second, the problem happened without any financial support. Students were left to say, take a decision that they have to go back home. Flight tickets were like 10,000, more than 10,000. That was the average I'm speaking about. So how do you expect that a student would be able to afford that? A general mass of student, they couldn't. Secondly, the major problem was I would because I want to tell it with an example. I wrote it in Student Struggle also, that Paras, who I have taken the example from Maharashtra, who was a class 4 student, and he was very much happy in the first initial days of lockdown because he thought that it's a holiday period and it's very joyful for any child that it's holiday from school. We don't have to study for some time. But within 5-6 days, he understood what the actual condition is. His father, who was a driver, had to lose his job. His mother, who was used to work in other people's home, had lost her job. So now Paras and his sister is going to sell vegetables in the nearest societies to make sure that they are earning a bread. And Paras is explaining how difficult it is for Paras because by the end of the evening, his back aches, his head aches because of this all kind of course that is having to do. So this is exactly where the student community is left to. And the sudden decision and this now the UGC guidelines and every kind of guidelines saying that we want a reform, sudden radical reform in the education sector by moving into digitalization. It's very good if technology is being used for the upliftment of a society, scientific measures used for the betterment to help the society, but science and technology used to ensure that the gaps and the class divisions within the society get formalized is something going to harm the society, and that is going to stay with us for the longer run, and where we are going to go to push the marginalized more into marginalized spaces and vulnerable things. And that is exactly where my fear lies, that this lockdown is somewhere formalizing the ways of privatization and commercialization in education sector. It is making education sector more of a commodity than as a right. It is not coming up to me looking as that government is ever feeling that education is a matter of right and it should reach as a fundamental right to every student, or else the government would have declared internet as a fundamental right. It should have stated that even for the very first day, that we stand with each and every student in this country and we understand the vulnerable situation that they're going through. They're having to miss academic sessions, but as a government we stand responsibly going to give every student financial support, We are going to ensure that every student would come back to the education sector after the lockdown, and we stand right there with the internet as a fundamental right. But this didn't happen. Contrary, what happened, it was left to the students to decide that whether they're going to choose online education or whether they're going to not just get into an echo chamber and feel mentally chaotic, that they're not able to join online education. And these will also lead to further I'm just getting a bit long, but I just want to explain that this is going to lead to more problems, chaos in the families, in smaller families, where students would have an argument within the family, where the family members won't have enough economy to support their children with such kind of online education. Because online education as internet is not going to only give you online education. You need a laptop, you need basic infrastructure, which are not yet there. We have seen a country where the hinterlands and villages and even towns don't even for schools. How can we expect that we can actually immediately transform it to an online education? For that, the GDP spending on education need to increase, which has not has happened in the last few years. And with the National Education Policy of 2019, which is formalizing privatization and commercialization in education, don't see in a near future that education is going to reach to every citizen of this country as a fundamental right.
That's very well said. I appreciate very much what you said about it's quite easy to look at the headlines, digital education. But when you go underneath that, digital education is a class struggle itself. And I think these details are very important. Just to be clear, the place where your article was published is Student Struggle, the Journal of the Student Federation of India. And that's available at studentstruggle.in. And I think, what's the name of the article?
It's like education amidst the health crisis.
Okay, so I think people should go and read your article. I think that's a very important intervention. I mean, it's very hard to even, one feels overwhelmed emotionally. There is the complete, really cruel policy or non-policy towards migrant workers, non-policy towards women, non-policy towards students. I mean, there is a kind of inflation of cruelty from the government. And I think that you can't not speak about this in sharp terms. So I'm very glad that, the way you're speaking, Aishi, it's not just what you're saying. It's very hard to be sober, don't you feel sometimes?
Yeah, it's totally. And one more point that I would like to add: the student activists at this moment getting booked under UAP and everything is more tough. I think so. It's getting really tough, and I, as a student activist, have to speak this about and let the people know that it is getting more tough. The government is curbing every form of dissent during these times when the lockdown and the pandemic is something that evil we need to fight in the society against the pandemic. What they're trying to find out is more. They're trying to create enemies in front of this society, which is actually not an enemy for this society, and that pains us as the student community. That where should we go? Where should we speak about our agonies? Who will hear us? If not the government, then where should we go? Because you are immediately tagged as anti-national. You are immediately told over social media about speaking. And as you know, as student activists, we know these are hard times when we can't campaign on the streets. We are having to resort to social media campaigns, Twitter campaigns, for to let the world know, or our people know, what we are actually facing. But the kind of the trolls and the kind of backlash that we are getting is also quite disheartening from an elected government.
Well, and the government continues to arrest people. Despite the call for lockdown, physical distancing, it had no compunction in arresting our leftward author, Anand Teltumde. Gautam Navlakha was arrested in the middle of this. And I gather this week, student activists have also been picked up. Would you like to talk a little about that?
Yeah, surely. Like, this is a very important thing that we should be talking about. As we all know that before this pandemic actually broke into, and several things, the anti-CA protests were keeping quite like growing somewhere, or people were seen on the streets, irrespective of their religion. People who felt that this is something, a fight to save our constitution. Every one of us came down on the streets to tell the government that this is not what we want to see in our country, or this is not what the younger generation want. The younger generation wants good education. We want employment. The unemployment rate is increasing like anything. And because of such things, we know the division in the society is going to increase like anything. There will be more kind of riot-like situation where there wouldn't be food reaching to people, there wouldn't be education reaching to people, there wouldn't be jobs left. And because of this kind of polarization, we were speaking up that this is not the time that the government can spend crores of rupees on a useless Citizenship Amendment Act that has no place in this country and trying to divide citizens on the basis of religion. And in all those things, it went and the pandemic broke in. Protests were taken off. Everybody knew that physical distancing is something according to the guidelines. And when this started happening, student activists from Jamia Millia Islamia, as Comrade Vijay already told, Tel Tumle, Navlakha, all were just booked. And students, Safura Zargar, whom I want to mention, a woman who is in her second trimester, like even in war zones, you don't keep women who are pregnant into like you just don't put them behind the bars and you just don't lock them up. And this is the country in a democracy that we are facing today. That Safura is just in today. She has just been given a permission to talk to her family. Throughout these 1 month, she was not even allowed to talk to any of her family members. It's really disheartening. Not only booking them, it's booking them under UAPA and putting sedition laws against them, and just announcing that they are terrorists is something really something we need to reflect, that what are we actually wanting in this democracy. Do we actually want even people to come out with better policies? Because what we as students want to reflect the government, that as a student community we want to see these things in our society. We want these, if this happens, we can improve as a society, and the government can come with a talk with the student community to ask and negotiate what can happen and what not. But rather than doing that, they're just declaring students as terrorists, and that is something very crucial and frightening for the basic ethos of our democracy, where the constitution gives us rights to have our dissent, the constitution gives us rights to have all our rights to express our opinions, to have organizations, to have associations. The kind of reports that are already coming, because it's a international working day, like I would Labor's Day, I want to mention this, that how the 8 hours work schedule has been increased to 12 hours, and now the Gujarat Chambers Charter Association is saying suddenly that you can't have any trade union for a year and all, and they're trying to ban that. It is really coming as a shock, where everywhere it is seen that unionization is somewhere is something coming under the purview of this government, and the government somewhere wants to just finish off unionization because they fear that, because once unionization happens, they know that that particular community union will ask for their right, whether it's the laborers, whether it's the peasants, whether it's the students, teachers, anything. And that is exactly what is one of the basic crux of a democracy, and that is something is under like what to say is under threat in our democracy at this moment.
It's a funny kind of democracy, Oishi, and where you can have, in fact, you celebrate the unions of the capitalist class. In other words, the federation of capitalists, they can gather. They have big, huge programs. The prime minister will address them. You have all these sort of unions. They're totally acceptable. But unions of working people, unions of students are unacceptable. It's not like unions or associations across the board are told don't gather. They celebrate the unions of the capitalist class. I mean, Mr. Modi, in fact, had his resume or his CV, validated by the Tatas and so on at that big festival that they held for him. That's acceptable. So it's not a principled attack on associations. You're quite right. It's a class attack on associations. And so you would think students, right? You form a student organization. That should be a classless organization. But in fact, that's not exactly how it works. Could you talk a little bit about what one sees as the class attack against student struggle? What has been this class resentment or anger against student organizing?
Obviously, student struggle, as I have been part in these many years, have been a lot of class struggle, and also along with it a struggle of major identities which are vulnerable, which are marginalized, and women, the identity of women, identity of transgenders, all comes inside, because there are a lot of trajectories within our society, that a lot of marginalization that has to be picked in within the class struggle. That is important with the changing times and the rights that we are asking. And in all those things, what we are fighting is a class which can afford education. And I want to mention it's an afford, because in this time, affordable education is something which is misinterpreted by these capitalist forces. They are saying Amity is affordable, or certain private institutes, just not naming one, I'm just saying any of the private institutes are affordable. So what is affordable? Affordable for whom? Because I just want to delete that word called affordable in our dictionary, because affordable is not the right word anymore, because that has been exploited in our country. What we should be saying is accessible education, accessible education, accessible for all, a fundamental right to education. Because in the last few months and years, we have seen how we are on the streets fighting for accessible education, because we feel if education is made available only for the rich, it will automatically will become non-accessible for the ones who won't be able to afford education of that high range. So that is why we are saying that it's a class struggle where we need to unite the students. Obviously, student struggle should be classless, as you were saying, but it is not anymore. You are having to bring in and organize students within an university where there are different students coming from different class backgrounds, but to make that consciousness and to tell them that it's not about if you can pay, you pay it. And exactly that is what the thing the vice chancellors or the government at this moment, MHRD, is trying to say, that those who can pay, let them pay and afford, and let them take the benefits, and those who can't pay, let them not, let them be satisfied with whatever it is. So those who can't pay, let them have a school with no roof, and those who can pay, let them have a school with AC. So this is exactly what we are against of, because education can't be treated as a commodity that you get it if you can pay. Because in our country, this is the exact problem of the neoliberal idea itself, that treating everything as a commodity. And it's just like a simple interest sum that we do. We invest a sum, it's a stock market thing. We invest a sum, we invest a time. We just try to calculate that what we are getting from it. So if the 5 years degree we are doing of masters, bachelors and masters included, we will immediately calculate that what we are getting out of it. And that is why in our country we have seen, if people are doing research or social sciences, there is no worth. It is been seen as something that you are doing uselessly and you don't need to do. Exactly where is the problem, that this continuous idea of education, that it is about improving your class interest, it's about improving your class. If you are coming from a particular class, you have to improve and get hop into the next class to get better facilities. So this is the monetary and the commodification of education is very problematic, I feel, and that is exactly where our struggle lies, to make students conscious and tell them that education can't be treated as that. It is a basic fundamental right, and each and every citizen till the last end should be receiving. And I will say one thing, it's not that in our country certain states are not doing that. Like Kerala has been brilliantly doing that. Yesterday, the Kerala government declared scholarships for students. The Delhi government is trying a bit and piece to ensure that Delhi school governments are changing their ways and trying to be better. I'm not saying that whole of Delhi has changed a lot, but a lot of students from private schools have been shifting towards government schools, we have seen. So it's not an utopian idea that we are thinking that we can't have. A common school structure is something that we are demanding, so that there is no exploitation on the basis of caste, gender, and any kind of other discrimination that happens in our country and has been happening in our country in the last 70 years.
As you speak, we've had an arc. There's first we're talking about the fundamental right to food and fundamental right to medical care. You were on the streets of Durgapur yesterday distributing supplies. A fundamental right to gender equity, fundamental right to education, fundamental right to communication. You talked about the right to the internet. The erosion of the idea of fundamental rights. For instance, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. People should go and read this. It's widely available on the internet. It's almost a constitution for the planet Earth. The 1948 Declaration. I very much Hope people will read it. Article 25 of the Declaration talks about things like right to housing, things that we don't take as a right anymore, but as a privilege, which is why the organization you belong to, Student Federation of India, has as its motto, study and struggle. Students have been attacked in the last several years, not just the last 10 years, Vaishi, but for a long period, saying don't struggle, just study. Your job is to study. Why are you wasting time here? And not attacked only by the right-wing forces, I must say, but also by some so-called well-meaning professors who say, don't struggle, study. Could you talk a little bit about what struggle has done for you as a person?
See, one thing that when we speak about this politics and student being into politics is something we need to remember Bhagat Singh, who wrote when he was in his jail, and he wrote an important piece addressing to the students of that time that why students should be political and why it is important for us to be political as youth. If we don't see what we want in the society, nobody is going to see it for us, or nobody is going to think for us. And exactly that is where we lie today. When you read, just open the National Education Policy of 2019. When you see the document, draft document, the minister then, MHRD minister then, Prakash, is writing how beautiful. If you read it, it's how beautiful to see, go through the lines that we have a young population. That is why India is called a young democracy. But that is the problem. When the young democracy has an opinion, that is where the people in power start having problem. When you say that yes, we want to have an opinion that how women should be at particular places, why are not women entering schools or colleges, what is the problem, why are they been not been given better infrastructure so that they can continue. And I think so I have always the institute that I belong from, Jawaharlal Nehru University, is something a lot talked about its students movement, or the kind of attack that it faces, or many of the things that it has been debated about. But I have always felt that if not JNU as an institute, or the students movement there, like many of the other universities are really fighting hard at this moment with their movements to make it sure that they're more inclusive. If not students of JNU would have thought of an inclusive educational institution, I'm still not saying that it is one of the best, or it gives all the facilities, or it is inclusive to the end and the best. But I still feel that if the students there wouldn't have thought of having a education system or structure like that within the institute, I hope many of the women like me wouldn't have been ever encouraged to come into an institute like JNU. Because it is difficult to struggle from your family, within your family, and to tell them why higher education is needed. Because like many people have come into personal conversations with me and have thought that I belong to a family where my family has always supported me to do what I wanted, or I had an opinion because my parents always wanted me to be opinionated. It's not that easy. We also come from families like coming from very small towns. People have that pressure within the society, and we also had to learn and relearn. And that is exactly what our university spaces taught us: to be tough, to fight, to have our opinions. And that has made a lot difference in me, in a way that I started reading a lot. I started knowing. I didn't know many of the things when I was there back in my hometown. I didn't even have an iota of example was what these things are, what would study and struggle mean. Like even I used to think that students are meant to be study, but then I reflected that exactly our politics is everything that is changing the society. Politics is everything that is deciding everything for us. And exactly, if we don't choose our politics, then we wouldn't be able to choose what our studies would look like, or education sector would look like. And that is where I have shaped my understanding of coming into student activism, or being political as a student, in the very first way.
It's very interesting that you spoke of struggle in this way. 100 years ago, Lenin was writing that trade unions are the school of the workers. Today is, after all, International Workers' Day, May Day, when you have to understand that for people working in factories 100 years ago, or on the fields 100 years ago, education was not available to the working class in the way that there has been some expansion now. So when they talked in those days about the trade unions as a school of the workers, what they meant is that it was through trade unions that workers could come in, they could understand, talk about with each other their own lives, create therefore a theory of their life so that they don't personalize suffering. I am in a bad situation because I am bad, fate, God, and so on. You have a scientific understanding of your social condition. Seems to me for students, student associations, student unions are the same. I mean, the suicide, or let's call it the institutional murder of Rohit Vemula, for instance, is a very good example of this. Here's a young man studying, feeling the immense weight of pressure on himself, and in a sense, murdered by the system. But of course, associations and trade unions allow you to politicize oppression and exploitation and understand that you're not alone and so on. I would like you to talk a little bit about the impact that Rohit's institutional murder had on you and has had on the student movement across India.
So I remember I was in my final year when that happened in January, and in February, obviously the JNU incident too took place, and it was just consequent things happening in the students movement, a lot of students movement happening, and I was in my graduation final year, and I was just about to apply to JNU and to go to JNU, and obviously because of that I was trying to read a lot about what is happening in students movement those times, and I remember, I still remember, I want to just share my views, like from my personal experiences. When we were discussing about Rohit Vemula, why did this happen? What is the general idea in a society about suicides? That people are coward, that's why they suicide, or like what was not, I think so. Like people, I remember when I said that there's a student in Hyderabad Central University who took away his life, and then I remember my friend saying, he might be depressed with something, he might be something, like it's just as long. And then I started reading their versions, and then I started reading more about it, and then I realized this is not the first time there has been happening. And then I started seeing the surveys and percentages of students coming from marginalized section, how many people are able to come to the marginalized section, and that is exactly when it struck me that exactly we don't realize. And Rohit's I think so institutional murder opened eye for the students across the spectrum along our country, that institutional murders this time came maybe in the media as a horrific picture in front of us, but this was happening. This was long due, which was taken as a normal suicide happening, whether in IITs, like institutes. We never tried to find out what students are going through, and that is exactly Vijay, my fear is during these lockdown time that many students might be going through that mental chaos. We are not able to reach out to them with the mental chaos. They might be seeing their parents burdened with no feeling helpless, that then maybe not able to help their families because their families have lost their jobs. They don't know. They may be wanting to continue education, but maybe lacks of loans their parents have taken, and now they know that there is a huge economic crisis and they won't be able to give up. And that is exactly where my fear is, that I don't know how we as an institution are able to somewhere support our students even after a case like Rohit's, and millions of like that maybe has happened across the globe, where students have taken away their lives because of the systemic help or structural help that they have not got. They have been not heard. Their depression or their reasons of depression or mental health has been taken as an usual thing of a kind of heartbreak in a love story or something like that, and been casually left out. So I feel that Rohit's death and institutional murder had shook not only the nation and the students of our country, but it opened an eye for all student movements across the globe, that what is wrong, why is our education system failing, and what is wrong with our education system, that a student of this age who should be going to do a job maybe in next couple of years, or would be wanting to contribute into research of this society, what went wrong that Rohit had to take away his life? What was so unhappy in his life that he just thought of taking that extreme step? What we couldn't do as a system, or how as a system we failed, that we couldn't make him accommodative in our own systems? Why was the system so exclusion that we couldn't make Rohit inclusive in our system? That is exactly where all this question starts from, that our structures, our frameworks are so exclusive in nature that it doesn't give space to the vulnerable and the marginalized community. And that I think so has a lot of impact on me as well, and a lot of students who are part of students movement or not part of students movement have been hearing about Rohit.
One of the things that we know from our history of struggle is that terrible inherited social hierarchies, such as the wretchedness of caste, the wretchedness of patriarchy, um, these get exacerbated. The pressures of caste hierarchy, gender hierarchies get exacerbated in a crisis. And I think it's therefore so important, the work that Student Federation of India, other student organizations are doing in this time to raise awareness. It's lonely to be young. When you're young, you're coming to understand yourself, your place in the world. There's a loneliness to that. And, I think it's so important for people to understand that student unions, student organizations are an antidote to loneliness. And, we politicize what is otherwise seen as a personal trauma. The indignities of caste and patriarchy are not, they're personally felt, but it's not a personal issue, it's a political issue. And I think that's what unions and organizations do. And I think I'm very glad that you speak so forcefully about things like this, because I don't think this should be a casual, just it's a terrible thing. No, we are all in this together. We want to crush these indignities.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's switch gears. We have about, I think 15 minutes to go, 10 minutes to go. I want to ask you about your own studies, Oishi, because people don't think about you as a student.
That's more important, I think.
So you joined JNU, I remember, because you and I talked about this some time ago, to study international affairs, right? International relations.
Yeah.
What is your project? Tell us about your project and where it is now.
So I did my bachelor's in political science, just to cut short, and did my master's in international relations and in area studies. That was a new course in 2016. And I was very much into that. I wanted to get through JNU, and I really wanted to do IR, because I felt that IR is something that keeps on changing, and something I love. I really like that global order changing, how things can change, and something that I really liked while studying political science. And then when I wanted to work after my master's, I wanted to do research in somewhere I can contribute. I felt was I wanted to work in water, areas of water or something, and climate change. So presently I'm enrolled in MPhil, doing my MPhil in Center for Inner-Asian Studies, and in the Department of International Relations. And my work is how there has been continuously climate change, and because of that we are seeing that there has been repeatedly problems happening, like water resources and the politics behind the water resources, majorly in the plateau area of the Himalayan plateau areas and China and Tibetan areas.
Well, I mean, you obviously go there, but I want to let people know that they should visit the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI. People's Archive of Rural India is so important because there have been such rich stories about the water struggles. Up in Ladakh, there was a couple of stories up on the Himalayan high plateau and so on. So I really recommend people go and visit People's Archive of Rural India. This is a very important and, let's say, not just timely, but it's a very much a humane subject of study. What have you been reading during the Great Lockdown? I mean, I know you're on the streets, and I know you're non-stop doing lectures and talks and presentations and so on. But in the space between all that, what have you been reading?
So I've been completing my dissertation, because my dissertation is due by June 30th. Up till now, if the UGC doesn't increase the deadline or something, and because I have to finish my chapters. So I've been reading a lot about, obviously, water issues and all these days, because I'm concentrating on that. But along that, I'm trying to read more on student issues also, because that is something that has struck me during the lockdown also, how the students are getting impacted. And I read a lot of reports, and we have been having some women committee meetings. We have been looking into Clara Zetkin, what she thought about fascism and everything. So just trying to read a lot, not lot of theories, but trying to just make my way, because a lot of live sessions. So I think so I'm doing more on student issues. I'm trying to read around what is happening in different countries. The other day I was trying to read how is China coping up after this lockdown. How are they sending the students back to school? What are the precautions they are to make my mind that what impacts can be there in our country, being a student activist, what things we can be giving as an alternative, as a constructive framework, because I always believe that criticism without constructive alternatives is something I don't believe in, because I feel a lot of criticisms happen around, critical analysis happen around, but many of the students many times just lose their path because they don't get an alternative, they don't know where to go. So if we just take out examples from other countries or other places that they're doing well, I'm just trying to note down those things and trying to read about them this time.
It's interesting, Aishi. Yesterday, April 30th, every year is celebrated around the world as the day that the Vietnamese were able to eject the United States military, which really destroyed that country. Used chemical weapons, bombed agriculture for 2 or 3 generations. Vietnam's agricultural sector is going to be very difficult to revive. There are people who have casual attitudes, Aishi, about Vietnam. They say, oh, it's now capitalist. You know how people talk. It's sold out, this, that. It's a very unfeeling judgment about a country that, had to face the brunt of the imperialist war machine. I think it's a good idea for people to go and see what Vietnam has done since 1975, the internal struggles and so on. There's been no deaths from COVID-19 in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. It was a science-based approach to the disease. And I think they are also getting ready to restart schools. They stopped schools in, I think, January. They just closed it down. They said the lives of our children are much more important than anything else. And they did it in a very planned and proper way. It's the advantages of socialism, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I had been reading a couple of articles regarding Vietnam, because it was quite interesting for me also when I came through about reading Vietnam, and I'm just trying to see also what is happening in COVID, because that's usual current affairs. We are trying to see which country is dealing with what. Obviously in media, too much of news is there about US, or because China, now much of antagonism going on between these two countries. But people don't generally talk about how countries like Vietnam, or countries like, many people talked about how South Korea had built that booth kind of thing within their countries, and then when Kerala replicated it within few days, and people were going really saying that how such models are replicated when state governments are taking responsibility so that physical distancing is maintained and all these things. So just I was coming through Vietnam and did a phase-wise lockdown. Like we did a lockdown, sudden 4 hours news, and you are being told lockdown from tomorrow, no vegetables. We don't know whether you will get food, and everything was through media. We didn't even see the briefing of the Prime Minister every day at a particular time and telling people that these many hospitals are built, these many testing centers are coming up. These are the. It was trying to be It was like the central government left everything to the hands of the people and you decide. But what we saw in Vietnam, as we read through, it was more of a state government controlled, more people centric, taking people into understanding and taking people into confidence and doing it. And what Vietnam is saying their secret has been to contain, like, stop this coronavirus from spreading and the deaths to be till zero, has been the maintaining public confidence. That is something I take from Vietnam's learning of positive stories about COVID, is the kind of public confidence they could build in people. They could give the confidence to each and every person in their country that yes, we are there with you and we are all together in this. But in a country like India, it looks like the people who have money, they're all in it. The people who don't have anything, they are all in it together in a different space. So that makes the vulnerability more, that tomorrow if I am affected by COVID, maybe nobody will come to look after me. So let's just accumulate resources. If I have money, I'll just accumulate potatoes and onions because tomorrow food might not be there. This is the psyche that comes when the government is itself clueless at what has to be given on the plate of people.
Thank you very much for joining us